Welcome to Leaping Larry's Revolutionary Reading Theatre.
Okay, as you might know, we are reading from George Jackson's Blood in My Eye. And I think we're on chapter 4. They're not really numbered, so I'm just guessing on the chapter numbers here. But we're on the chapter titled Fascism, which is on page 21, if you're reading along. And if you want a copy of the work for yourself to read, you can type reading like this into my chat. And that will give you a link to where this read is stored, which is here. And it's just right here, Blood in My Eye. You can read it right in your browser. You just go to preview like this. Give it a second to load. There you go. That's how you can read along. There's lots of other good reads on that in that same list as well. And you can access that list by typing Theory List 2 into chat. And that will just bring you to the main folder that you just saw me bring up there. You can also type Theory List into chat to get a more condensed Marxist focused one as well. So I have two here. This one we have edited on stream. It has some really good stuff, including Glenn-Sean Couthard, Red Skin, White Mass. It's the Juche works that I recommend you starting with. And then this one has them broken down into various categories as well. So check those out. All your theory that you could ever want. Aside from Horn. Go buy some Gerald Horn. Alright. So this chapter, Fascism. Its most advanced form is here in America. I mean, after all, America, let's not forget, was the inspiration for fascism literally everywhere else. Comrade John. This is John Thorne. That's the author's lawyer. That's George Jackson's lawyer. Yes, spelled with a K. 3 Ks. If you want to be even more accurate, you spell it with 3 Ks. I've just finished rereading Angela's analysis of fascism. She's a brilliant, big, beautiful, revolutionary woman, ain't she? I've studied your letters on the subject carefully. It could be productive for the three of us to get together at once and subject the whole question to a detailed historical analysis. There is some difference of opinion and interpretation of history between us, but basically, I think we are brought together on the principal points by the fact that the three of us could not meet without probably causing World War III. Give her my deepest and warmest love and ask her to review these comments. This is not all that I will have to say on the subject. I'll constantly return to myself and re-examine. I expect I will have to carry this on for another couple of 100 pages. We'll deal with the questions as they come up, but for now, this should provoke both of you to push me on to a greater effort. The basis of Angela's analysis is tied into several old left notions that are at least open to some question now. It is my view that out of the economic crisis of the last Great Depression, fascism, corporatism, did indeed emerge, develop, and consolidate itself into the most advanced form here in America. In the process, socialist consciousness suffered some very serious setbacks. Unlike Angela, I do not believe that this realization leads to a defeatist view of history. An understanding of the reality of our situation is essential to the success of future revolutionizing activity. To contend that corporativism has emerged and advanced is not to say that it has triumphed. We are not defeated. Pure fascism, absolute totalitarianism, is not possible. Hierarchy has had 6,000 years of trial. It will never succeed for long in any form. Fascism and its historical significance is the point of my whole philosophy on politics and its extension, war. My opinion is that we are at the historical climax, the flashpoint of the totalitarian period. The analysis in depth that the subject deserves has yet to be done. Important as they are, both Wilhelm Reich's and Franz Newman's works on the subject are limited. Reich tends to be over-analytical to the point of idealism. I do not think Newman truly sensed the importance of the anti-socialist movement. Behemoth is too narrowly based on the experience of German National Socialism. So there is so much to be done on the subject, and time is running out. If I am correct, we will soon be forced into the same fight that the old left avoided. These are all a series of letters. So now the next one we have here dated 6/20/71. And I think because this is the States, they do month, day, year. Of course, because this is a 20. This always fucks me up though, because the way we do it here is day, month, then year. Which in my brain makes more sense because it's the smallest unit, days, then the next size unit, months, and then the next size unit, year. The States always does it this way though, month, day, year. Fucks me up every time I see it. The US just has to be different. Yep, just like the metric system shit. Absolutely. Anyway, I digress. It is not defeatist to acknowledge that we have lost a battle. How else can we regroup and even think of carrying on the fight? At the center of revolution is realism. Hey, Manticore. U.S. military uses day, month, year. That's so what the fuck? It's so weird. To call one or two or a dozen setbacks defeat is to overlook the ebbing and flowing process of revolution. Coming closer to our calculations and then reading, but never standing still. Ooh, and if you want to learn more about that, we actually just read about that in the Stalin book that we read just before this, didn't we? About the ebb and flow of the revolution, if you remember. If a thing isn't building, it must be decaying. As one force emerges, the opposite force must yield. As one advances, the other must retreat. There's a very significant difference between retreat and defeat. I am not saying that our parents were defeated when I contend that fascist corporatism emerged and advanced in the US. At the same time, it was making its advance. It caused, by its very nature, an advance in worldwide socialist consciousness. When US capitalism reached the stage of imperialism, the Western great powers had already divided among themselves almost all the important markets in the world. We're quoting right now, by the way. At the end of the World War II, when the other imperialist powers had been weakened, the US became the most powerful and richest imperialist power. Meanwhile, the world situation was no longer the same. The balance of forces between imperialism and the socialist camps had fundamentally changed. Imperialism no longer ruled over the world, nor did it play a decisive role in the development of the world situation. Bo Nugent Gia. In my analysis, I'm simply taking into account the fact that the forces of reaction and counter-revolution were allowed to localize themselves and radiate their energy here in the US.
To say that socialism doesn't work is to overlook the fact that it did work, and it worked for hundreds of millions of people.
The process has created the economic, political, and cultural vortex of capitalism's last reform. My views correctly correspond with those of all the Third World revolutionaries, and Nate in the seizure of state power. Our real purpose is to redeem not merely ourselves, but the whole nation and the whole community of nations from colonial community economic repression. Oh yeah, I mean, they're only temporarily powerful, Sue, because capital has influence. The real power lies with the people, right? Because even capital having influence implies literally that the power still lies with the people. It's simply that capital can be used as a means of influencing the people, and therefore redirecting their energy is why it is at all powerful. It's still the people that are powerful. Why they need this big apparatus to control the people, all these other things. Okay, mama. Don't worry, this all is a banger. The US has established itself as the mortal enemy of all people's governments, all scientific socialist mobilization of consciousness everywhere on the globe, all anti-imperialist activity on Earth. The history of this country in the last 50 years and more, the very nature of all its fundamental elements, and its economic, social, political, and military mobilization distinguish it as the prototype of the international fascist counter-revolution. The US is the Korean problem, the Vietnam problem, the problem in the Congo, Angola, Mozambique, the Middle East. It's the grease in the British and Latin American guns that operate against the masses of the common people. 621-71. The nature of fascism, its characteristics, and properties have been in dispute ever since it was first identified as a distinct phenomenon growing out of Italy's state-supported and developed industries in 1922. Whole libraries have been written around the subject. There have been 100 party lines on just exactly what fascism is. But both Marxists and non-Marxists agree on at least two of its general factors: its capitalist orientation and its anti-labor, anti-class nature. These two factors almost by themselves identify the US as a fascist corporative state. The exact definition of fascism concerns me because it will help us identify our enemy and isolate the targets of revolution. Further, it should help us to understand the workings of the enemy's methodology. Settling this question of whether or not a mature fascism has developed will finally clear away some of the fog in our liberation efforts. This will help us to broaden the effort. We will not succeed until we fully accept the fact that the enemy is aware, determined, disguised, totalitarian, and mercilessly counter-revolutionary. To fight effectively, we must be aware of the fact that the enemy has consolidated through reformist machinations the greatest community of self-interest that has ever existed. Our insistence on military action, defensive and retaliatory, has nothing to do with romanticism or precipitous idealistic fervor. We want to be effective. We want to live. Our history teaches us that the successful liberation struggles require an armed people, a whole people, actively participating in the struggle for the liberty. The final definition of fascism is still open, simply because it is still a developing movement. We have already discussed the defects of trying to analyze a movement outside of its process and its sequential relationships. You gain only a discolored glimpse of a dead past. The way that, of course, liberals and liberalism analyzes fascism is exactly in that way, in order for it to be just something of the dead past, right? No one will fully comprehend the historical implications and strategy of fascist corporativism except the true fascist manipulator, or the researcher who is able to slash through the smokescreens and disguises the fascist setup. Fascism was the product of class struggle. It is an obvious extension of capitalism, a higher form of the old struggle, capitalism versus socialism. I think our failure to clearly isolate and define it may have something to do with our insistence on a full definition. In other words, looking for exactly identical symptoms from nation to nation. We have been consistently misled by fascism's nationalistic trappings. We have failed to understand its basically international character. In fact, it has followed international socialism all around the globe. One of the most definite characteristics of fascism is its international quality. Think about that. And that's important. I don't know how many of you, or I don't think we actually read on stream yet, but Kim Jong-il talks about on his book on having a proper understanding of nationalism. He talks about how imperialists and the bourgeoisie use nationalism as a cloak to hide their actual class interests. In other words, they're not actually, they're like, even in ones that are in places that have legitimate claims to nationhood, like even then they're not loyal to their own nation, right? Like more often than not, the bourgeoisie of take like England or something, they're not loyal to England, right? They're loyal to themselves. They're loyal to their class interests, and they will betray their own nations for that. And that's why one thing that like Kim Jong-il tries to point out is like it's even more than simply you have revolutionary nationalism and you have reactionary nationalism, but even more than that, the reactionary bourgeois nationalism isn't nationalism at all. It's just a cloak to disguise their interests, which go beyond their own national interests. The cloak is just to disguise it. Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole reason why they do that march is exactly like what you're alluding to there. Is so that reactionaries can then go, look, this doesn't look exactly like it does in Nazi Germany, so therefore it isn't fascism. There's no swastikas or something like this, right? Absolutely. Ad breaking 5. If you don't want ads, sub and get awesome emotes as well. Don't worry if you are subject to the ad, I do anything you miss, I do of course re-upload these readings as well. Yeah, absolutely, Sam. Just the Empire. Call it instead of calling it the US, just call it the Empire. I like that I like that. So now we have 62271 here. The trends towards monopoly capital began effectively just after the close of the Civil War in America. Hell yeah, Robo. Prior to its emergence, bourgeois democratic rule could be said to have been the predominant political force inside American society. As monopoly capital matured, the role of the old bourgeois democracy faded in process. As monopoly capital forced out the small dispersed factory setup, the new corporativism assumed political supremacy. Monopoly capital can in no way be interpreted as an extension of old bourgeois democracy. The forces of monopoly capital swept across the Western world in the first half of this century. But they did not exist alone. Their opposite force was also at work, i.e., international socialism. Lenin's and Fanon's. National wars of liberation guided not by the national bourgeois, but by the people, the ordinary working class people. At its core, fascism is an economic rearrangement. It is international capitalism's response to the challenge of international scientific socialism. It developed from nation to nation out of differing levels of traditionalist capitalism's dilapidation. The common feature of all instances of fascism is the opposite of weak socialist revolution. When the fascist arrangement begins to emerge in any of the independent nation states, it does so by default. It is simply an arrangement of the established capitalist economy, an attempt to renew, perpetrate, and legitimize that economy's rulers by circumflexing and weighing down, diffusing a revolutionary consciousness pushing from below. Fascism must be seen as an episodically logical stage in the socio-economic development of capitalism in a state of crisis. It is the result of a revolutionary thrust that was weak and miscarried, a consciousness that was compromised. When revolution fails, it's the fault of the vanguard parties. It is clear that class struggle is an ingredient of fascism. It follows that where fascism emerges and develops, the anti-capitalist forces were weaker than the traditionalist forces. This weakness will become even more pronounced as fascism develops. The ultimate aim of fascism is the complete destruction of all revolutionary consciousness. And by the way, as part of our thing today, we're going to have a little quick look at how far away from revolutionary consciousness and what, like, for example, and why, even if they don't think they're fascist, why they're promoting a fascist ideology, which is very much in line with what we're talking about, like, here, essentially. And they represent, without even realizing it, but even in their language, they represent traditionalist forces. Think about even the way they talk about themselves now, where it's orthodox Marxists, so on and so forth, right? We got to preserve this thing. We gotta tail MAGA communism. We got to tail waving the American flags. All these other things. They represent traditionalist forces against that is fighting against a revolutionary consciousness, all while claiming that they are the ones raising revolutionary consciousness, right? It's a way for the system that needs to constantly grow to keep growing when it starts to struggle doing so. Yep. Our purpose here, sorry. US is the last boss. Funny thing. I do say, like, I can imagine a situation, though, where, like, liberation here wins and we see, like, capitalism take a last foothold in Europe or something, right? Isolated. We could see this center of capital shifting again, which might be made necessary by the weakening U.S. Empire. I don't get how communists see the perfect world and the US still exists. Oh, don't even get me started with that. It's like even me, 27, like even me defend, like the reaction to even me or someone like me defending USSR or DPRK as doing what is necessary to exist and keep the revolution going is then interpreted by other people as me claiming that these places are perfect or great or whatever the fuck. But it's like, here the thing is, I do at the end of the day agree with Lenin, right? Like I don't think states are fucking good or whatever the fuck. I think that the dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary. I think revolution is necessary, right? I I recognize that that these things being necessary doesn't mean that it's all like flowers and roses. It's like Mao said, it's not a dinner party. And like even without the existence of the US empire, having a revolution, fighting against eliminating like all class society and all the hangovers of class societies that have existed for like thousands of years, like what do you think that's going to look like? It's going to be a messy process. There's going to be counter revolutionaries, there's going to be, it's going to be a messy process, and human beings even collectively are capable of making serious mistakes, of committing serious crimes. It's absolutely. My criteria for whether I support a revolution or not is, are the people who were getting bombed before, are the people who were being starved before, what's going on with them, right? That's my criteria for whether I support it or not. I understand
the
it's not perfect.
revolution that feeds the children gets my support.
Exactly. It's like I look at what was there before and I look at what was there after.
To say that socialism doesn't work is to overlook the fact that it did work, and it worked for hundreds of millions of people.
And with you, and I mean, the interesting thing about USSR, speaking of Perenni, the interesting thing about USSR is we literally have both ways. We saw a country go from czarist autocracy, where capitalism was just starting to be built up. We saw what happened when that switched to a socialist country, the incredible change in their situation, the incredible human rights that were realized, by the way, that so many incredible labor rights realized in USSR that it literally directly compelled European countries, Britain, Canada, it literally compelled them to actually start giving their people a better social wage, to actually start giving people some health care, stuff like this, because of the bad example that USSR was presenting. So partially, in a lot of countries where you have a national healthcare service in Europe and Canada, you kind of have the USSR to thank for that as well, funnily enough. Because it was literally them achieving these things that made the capitalists go, well, if we don't give our working class something, we're going to have a revolution just like Russia did. Yeah, well, hey, 27, and I mean, it's shitty here too. It sterilizes First Nations people, but, we always like to pat, or like, I see liberals always pat themselves on the back for the healthcare service. It's like, nah, the most pressure actually came from USSR. The New Deal as well. Yep, same thing. Same thing. It was all because of the bad example that USSR was presenting. And then look, we can look at the other side of the coin. What happened when USSR was overthrown, right? We saw the most dramatic fall of life expectancy ever recorded. It went from steadily rising like this, and then with the overthrow of socialism, life expectancy literally plummets. And they try to excuse this as, oh, that's just the growing pains of a new system. Well, then how come it did the opposite when socialism was emerging? You know? And then, we can talk about, like, all of the fucking industries that will completely destroy it, especially East Germany. Yeah. I mean, and that is the other part. Yeah, that is absolutely part of it. Absolutely. The take that the UK gave NHS to people because of socialist sentiment was rising. Yep. And I mean, this goes along with, like, think about dialectics, right? This goes along
Bye,
with
Larry.
the
Go
USSR.
read Lenin.
The USSR winning its revolution, implementing all of these things. That sets a bad example. And then people here are like, wait a second, you're telling us that Russia, this country that, you're taught all the time is, like, backwards and all this other shit. They can't even make fridges and shit like this, but oh wait, they're giving their workers all this shit. That was supposed to be the bad example place that they used. They bludgeoned us over the head with, right? So they're like, okay, well, we got to give them a little bit of something. Otherwise, we're going to have a revolution on our hands here. And yeah, and all of those systems, and that's the other part of it too. With the overthrow, not only can we look at the effects of Russia, but we can also see that all of those systems started being dismantled as soon as USSR was overthrown. Literally, the moment it was overthrown, our healthcare system started to be undermined. Even before that, even when it looked like USSR was playing along with the imperialists, was basically conceding to the imperialists, that's when they started doing it. And not only that, you look at the international arena as well. With the overthrow of the USSR, it also gave the imperialists a freer hand in, we always, with the Cold War, we always heard about the myth that the US is going to all of these countries, is invading all of these countries to protect them from the influence of the USSR, right? To stop them from becoming puppets of the USSR, becoming communist, which was really made to be synonymous with puppet of the USSR at the time. So the US had to go to all these places and do that. Well then, but what proves that wrong is with the overthrow of the USSR, the US accelerated that even further, right? Like the Cold War ramped up with the overthrow of USSR. They went into more places. They had a freer hand in invading, bombing, and getting rid of whoever they wanted. Because now all of a sudden they didn't need all these little buffer countries. Now all of a sudden they could bomb Yugoslavia for 7 days and 7 nights. They could fucking get rid of Gaddafi, right? All of this other shit. They could bomb Iraq. All of these things. They accelerated the Cold War with the overthrow of the USSR. Because the Cold War was never against the USSR. The Cold War has always been against international proletarian revolution. And the reason why it fought against the USSR is because USSR was in the camp of proletarian socialist revolution. As I always say, the ongoing DPRK revolution, as many setbacks and successes and so on and so forth as there has been, the DPRK revolution, the Vietnam Revolution, all of these revolutions that are ongoing are waiting for everybody else to join them in world revolution, because they can't import and export the revolution. All they do, what the task of revolutions is to win in their own country, to have the proletariat in control of the means of production and the state. And once this is achieved in every country, or at least in a majority of countries, then we can start to talk about, like, progressing the world revolution further. First, we have to achieve the world revolution. You know what I mean? Yeah, let's not forget the effect of Reagan and Thatcher just before the USSR fell. Yep. And here we hear and here 27, funnily enough, her politics just copycatted that. Because it's almost like it's not down to the individual actors like Reagan and Thatcher, but it's like somebody is controlling. It's like somebody's interests are compelling our government to act in certain ways. I wonder if it has anything to do with what George Jackson is talking about here. Had a time machine, I'd give the guy who oh god, yeah. Yep, overthrow of USSR saved capitalism. Absolutely. And they recognize that. I mean, that's what Fukushima's whole thing, like the end of history. That's basically what that was expressing joy about, right? Motherfucker, we tell you when history has ended. Yeah, Fukuyama, thank you, yes. Have a good stream, Mama. Love you, comrade. Everybody follow Mama and Media. Oh yeah, absolutely. No, and I'm not downplaying that. Like definitely go and piss on Margaret Thatcher's grave, right? Like I'm just saying that it's interesting to note. But by all means, just as we can have our heroes of the revolution, right? I champion like and that's again not saying that our heroes are all perfect or anything, but they contributed greatly to world revolution. Well, the capitalists have their heroes too. Margaret Thatcher is one of their heroes, and because of that, you should spit and piss on her grave. And yeah, that lady's too bad, too bad. Go fuck yourself. Love that lady. Fuck yeah. She was great. Too bad, too bad. Yeah, she's great. All right, we got like we got like one page left. Same, same. Yep. Revolutionary tidings to her, for sure. Oh, that's a legendary clip. 27, legendary. All right, we got like 2 pages left. Let's finish this off. So this one is from 6/23/71. Our purpose here is to understand the essence of this living, moving thing so that we will understand how to move against it. This observer is convinced that fascism not only exists in the USA, but has risen out of the ruins of a once eroded and dying capitalism, phoenix like, to its most advanced and logical arrangement. One has to understand that the fascist arrangement tolerates the existence of no valid revolutionary activity. It has programmed into its very nature a massive, complex, and automatic defense mechanism. For all our old methods, for raising the consciousness of a potentially revolutionary class of people. The essence of a USA totalitarian socio-political capitalism is concealed behind the illusion of a mass participatory society. We must rip away its mask. Then the debate can end. And we can enter a new phase of struggle based on the development of an armed revolutionary culture that will triumph. And this I constantly say right now with what is going on in Palestine, with people becoming more aware of this situation in Palestine that has been a genocide for like 100 years. But now that people are becoming more aware of it, is the perfect time to make the link for them to fascism in the U.S., to fascism, the U.S. being the birthplace of real fascism in practice, and its most advanced form existing today. And then link that to settler colonialism and ongoing native genocide as well. and people will start to realize very quickly what they should support if they want to realize their own interests, right? On May 14th, 1787, the Constitutional Convention, with George Washington presiding officer, the work of framing the new nation's constitution, proceeded with 55 persons, and only 2 were not employers. There have been many booms and busts in the history of capitalism in this nation, and across the Western Hemisphere since its formation. The accepted method of pulling the stricken economy out of its stupor has always been to expand. It was pretty clear from the outset that the surplus value factor eventually leads to a point in the business cycle when the existent implementation of the productive factors makes it impossible for the larger factor of production, labor, to buy back the fruits of its labor. This leads to what has been erroneously termed overproduction. It is in fact underconsumption. The remedy has always been to expand, to search out new markets and new sources of cheaper raw materials to recharge the economy. The imperialist syndrome, it could be called. Conflicts of interest develop, of course, between the various Western nations, and eventually lead to competition for these markets. The result is always an ever-increasing international centralization of the various capitalist elites' worldwide cartels. International telegraphic unions, now international telecommunications unions, universal postal union, transportation, agriculture, and scientific syndicates. Before World War I, there were 45 or 50 such international syndicates, not counting the purely business cartels. The international quality of capitalism is not happenstance. It is clearly in the interest of the ruling class to expand and unite. I am one Marxist-Leninist, Maoist, Faninist who does not completely accept the idea that the old capitalist competitive wars for colonial markets were actually willed by the various rulers of each nation. Even though such wars stimulated their local economies and made it possible to promote nationalism among the lower classes. War taken to the point of diminishing returns weakens rather than strengthens the participants. And if the rulers of these nations were anything at all, they were good businessmen. Expansion, then, which often led unavoidably to war, was the traditional recourse in the solving of problems created by vacuous, uncontrollable system, which never considered any changes in its arrangement, its essential dynamics, until it came under a very real, directly threatening challenge from below to its very existence. Fascism, in its early stages, is a rearrangement of capitalist implementation in response to a sharpening, threatening, but weaker egalitarian socialist consciousness. In regional or national economic crisis, the traditional remedies also include measures which stop just short of massive expansion on the international level. Traditional controls, short of expansion and war, have always existed in the form of government intervention, tariffs, public expenditure, government export subsidy, and limited control of the capital markets and import licenses. And monopolies have always used government to help direct investment. There you go. That's chapter 4, I think. Next time we read, we're on chapter 5, Classes at War. What do you think? Pretty good? Turns out the US is fascism.